right, today we are going to be taking a look at a very interesting but common use case with the Meraki APIs for automation, which is that of pushing out SSIDs. So you might want to manage SSIDs that already exist, or you might want to create a new SSID. But either way, you can use the same API call as long as you have your SSID number and your network ID. The SSID number is pretty important because it lets the dashboard know which SSID you're trying to make a change to. So let's head over to Atom over here where I've got my code. So as you can see, I've already imported the Meraki library. I've imported a couple other libraries as well that essentially allow me to store the API key and org ID in another file, so I don't have to put that in my hard code. And next, I've simply used the dashboard variable here to plug in the API key. So nothing new, things that we've already seen before. So heading back to the API page, here what we see is a lot of variables. So something that you should consider is that you obviously don't want to be editing all of these variables each time you use this API call, and simply remember that you need these two as the mandatory ones. Now, some of the variables you see here are dependent on the other ones. So for example, you can only edit your pre-shared key if your authorization mode, auth mode, is PSK. So if I scroll down a little bit over here, I can plug in the PSK using this API call, but the parameter is only valid if the auth mode is PSK. So we do know PSK is a very common authorization type, and a common use case also is to cycle these pre-shared keys. So maybe a month or every 2 months, you want to plug in a new one, and you don't want to go through your entire dashboard, maybe hundreds of networks to do this process. So let's see how we would go about doing that. The first thing we would need here is all of our networks. So let's actually head back over here and check out the call for getting all of the networks in an organization. So we're just gonna copy over what we see right here and plug it in. And then I'm going to create a variable here called networks, and all this information will go into the networks variable. So now I will have a list of networks. And then what I want to do is cycle through these networks and update the SSID. So to do that, I'm going to create a for loop. And let's go back to the API call for SSIDs. So yeah, for me, the best thing to do is just copy the code that already exists. It pretty much ensures you won't make any mistakes because a lot of these API calls exist at different levels of abstraction. So it helps a lot to simply copy it over. Now, I don't want to plug this into the network ID, but more so the specific network that I am in. So I'm going to let my program know that for the specific network that we're iterating over right now, we only want to make that change there. Next, your SSID number is quite crucial, so I would certainly recommend that you confirm that before you go about making any changes. If an SSID does not exist, then this will just create one for that SSID number, but you still need to plug in a number here. In my case, I'm just gonna plug in 5 because I know. And in this situation, if the SSID already exists, you don't even need to plug in the name. If you're creating a new SSID though, I would certainly recommend, obviously, that you create a name. So I'm just gonna call this API test. And you can also obviously use this call to update SSID names. And I would like to have that enabled. And yeah, I could pretty much make this call right now. And there's a few different ways we could go about this. So I would recommend that you create a function, and the argument for that function can be the pre-shared key in the scenario where you're trying to use pre-shared keys. But all these variables that you see over here are available to be edited. So if you want there to be splash pages on your SSIDs, all the radius information, bandwidth limitation, all of this can be deployed using the API for that specific SSID. And so this now ultimately really depends on your specific use case as to how you want to change your SSIDs or create and update them. But the idea here that I want you all to really understand is that of bulk configuration changes. So not just for SSIDs, but similarly for editing all the orgs that you have, sorry, all the networks that you have within an organization. You can create functions like these, you can create for loops, and it gets pretty easy to then make bulk configuration changes for things like firewall rules. Really anything you can imagine is available to be updated with the APIs. So go through here and you'll find all the API calls that are currently provided by Meraki and hopefully have some interesting use cases with automation. But yeah, let's save this and run this and see what happens. So it says organization ID is not defined. Or that's because I'm calling it org ID and it's organization ID by default when we copy over the code. So certainly something to be aware of. And yeah, it seems all the API calls went through, and I've just pushed out SSIDs and SSID information at scale. So that's another example of how you can use the Meraki APIs to automate and save a lot of time.